Welcome to part one of lecture 3. So the last main lecture that we'll have on this module. And what we're going to do in this lecture is mainly focus on critical writing to help you with the work of your report. So first of all, I want to just have a short discussion about the difference between descriptive and critical writing. Both are useful. Both I would expect to find in your report and other reports and papers that you write in the future. So let's just highlight a few issues about the two types. So descriptive writing introduces information. So that's what you're probably used to doing when you're writing things. So it introduces information without making significant comment or analysis of that information. It's useful and necessary. So I would expect all of your reports to have some descriptive writing. Descriptive writing, where are we going to put it? Well, it's most appropriate in the introduction, where we're giving background without really commenting on the background, but we're just giving the reader background for further reading. When it provides necessary background for the reader to understand the topic and what's coming next. So descriptive writing definitely has a place in the reports. But remember the title of this module. So critical writing evaluates information. It takes the information that you've read, that you've included in the introduction, that you've introduced, and it's essential in the main body of the literature review. So to make significant comments about the information that you've introduced. So I wouldn't expect the literature review to be purely descriptive. If it is, then it's not really forming the main part of this module. It should be critical. So you should be commenting on the information in your case, in the papers and the books that you've read for your subject. Critical evaluation of information requires often both, but certainly either a depth of understanding of the papers that you're evaluating, so you've understood those papers, and or a broad knowledge of the literature. So when you start off reading your papers, you'll find that quite difficult to do because you probably lack that broad knowledge, that general knowledge of the literature. But as you read papers, and what you'll probably do is you'll go back and you'll read a paper more than once, that knowledge that you gain, that depth of understanding that you'll be gaining will allow you to start writing the critical evaluation rather than just the descriptive part of the writing. So let's talk about something a bit more basic, a bit more fundamental, but not any less important. So that's about using paragraphs within your critical writing. So each paragraph should have a focus. It should have a purpose. It should have a point or an idea that you're attempting to convey across to the reader. And what you often find when people write is paragraphs become too long. They just go on and on and on, and it actually makes it quite difficult for the reader to get the message that you're trying to get over to them, the focus and the point of that paragraph. So if a paragraph becomes too long, it's difficult to say, put a number precisely on what too long is. But if it becomes too long, containing many points, then probably a good idea is to think about splitting that paragraph up into one or more paragraphs. So a paragraph for something rather simple, an idea that's easy to get across, should use a few sentences and of the steps of introduce the material, comment on the material, and then conclude. So again, remember what we talked about in the previous lecture. Introduce what's coming up to the reader, tell them the main body of what you want to tell them, and then summarize or conclude what you've just told them. And if you think about that even at the paragraph level, then that actually will make things very clear. If a paragraph is longer because you've actually got more complex ideas that you're trying to convey across to the reader, then the structure maybe tell the reader roughly what the conclusions will be, then introduce the material, comment on that material, and conclude. So again, it's the same sort of structure. Tell people what's coming up, tell them what you want to tell them, and then conclude and summarize what you've just told them. So just think about that when you're constructing paragraphs. And if it becomes too long, if when you go back and you start reading what you've written and you think, yeah, actually I'm getting a bit confused in the middle here, I've mixed up 2 or 3 different focus points that I'm trying to make, then think about splitting those paragraphs up. So just as an example, and we came across this in a previous lecture, there's an extra resource on the wiki with this sheet, just to give you some ideas, some thoughts about how to write critically and how to write properly. So the sheet itself, the full sheet, is on the wiki. This is just an example. So what I want to do is stop sharing the PowerPoint for a minute. And share this document. So as I said, this document's on the wiki. I'm not going to spend too much time now. And what I propose is we'll look at this in a bit more detail. We'll have a discussion about this in the workshop. So please have a good read of this. This is only a page. Have a good read of this document and have a think about the different sections. So what we've tried to do here is divide up the paragraphs. In some cases, it's just a sentence, into a number of different items. So we've got unreferenced statement, a reference statement, a synthesis, comparison, critique, comparative analysis, and reflection. And what you should see by reading each one of those is they have a different flavor. They have a different way that the paragraph or sentences have been constructed. And some are better than others. Some you might consider to be critical, and some you might not. So, for example, one reference statement, all biscuits are made of chocolate. I will leave that to you to decide whether that's descriptive or critical or any good whatsoever. If we go down to, so you'll see a comparative analysis, it's a really rather long paragraph, but that's because it's talking about many different sources of information. You'll see here it's referencing X and C and Y to make up its discussion, to make up the discussion thing. And finally on this, it's a reflective one where what you've done is the people have read a number of papers and then they're reflecting back on what they've read. So while it is widely agreed that calico indicates the presence of chocolate and it gives a number of references, so that's good, there is little discourse on what percentage of calico is necessary in order for something to be made of chocolate. So that's just reflecting back on what's being read. So have a read of this, and as I said, we will discuss that more in the workshop. So let me go back to our PowerPoint discussion. So there's a couple of examples here of things. So the unreferenced statement of fact. So I would propose that you never do this in a document that you're writing. It's a personal claim of fact without a citation to support the evidence or to support that statement. So that's really bad practice when you're writing scientific documents. So I would never really expect that to happen. So a reference statement, so that's one of the others in that list. So that's not simply adding a reference. So that's not the unreferenced statement with a reference added at the end, but actually to support the claim that you're making. But the sentence is rearranged. It may be subtle, but it is being rearranged. And it's distancing yourself from the claim. So it's not saying you're making that claim. It's saying that somebody else is making that claim. So it's reporting the claim without displaying partisan feelings for or against the claim at that stage. Of course, you may have a reflective statement or paragraph later, which actually does do that, but not actually when you're first doing it. So it's a dispassionate introduction of the material. So for our coming up workshop, so which paragraphs on that worksheet were critical and which were descriptive? So have a look through that and have a think, and maybe mark them up for yourselves about which are critical and which are descriptive. Okay, so a bit of a practical checklist when you start doing your writing for the module. Okay, so identify for yourselves the balance between descriptive and critical writing in your literature review. So when you introduce information, are you evaluating it or commenting on it? And remember, evaluating means critical, really. Commenting is descriptive. Okay. And when you're doing that, when you're looking at the sentences and paragraphs, okay, this thing about evaluating or commenting, okay, are you doing that in the next sentence, or in the current paragraph, or in the next paragraph? And if the answer is no, then that particular part is probably not critical. It's more descriptive. So you can do that as you write your paragraphs. You can go back and consider that information to do that checklist. And try and avoid provocative statements. It's not appropriate place to have such statements within a scientific document. So avoid becoming partisan about your language and in your thinking. Construct a rational and dispassionate argument. So, for example, a provocative statement could be, legged robots are better than wheeled robots. It could be, all swarm robots systems are more fault tolerant than non-swarm systems. So things like that, where it's really rather in your face, it's being provocative without also providing a proper argument. So things, words and phrases that can soften overly strong statements, so can soften these provocative statements, are things like, this indicates, may be the cause. So sensor faults may be the cause of failures of these robots. It could be argued, we believe, I believe that, it is believed that. So just think about how you construct your statements, how you construct your arguments when you're writing your report. Just to get into this mode of, you're not writing a letter to somebody, you're actually writing a scientific document. And therefore we do tend to write slightly differently within those sorts of documents. So that's the end of part 1 of lecture 3. And as usual, here's some tasks for the workshop. So with regard to your project, with regard to your particular topic, so start to construct a reading plan. And I realize that at this stage, this will still be draft because there's still lots of things for you to find to read. So how many papers have you read so far? And how many papers have you found that you intend to read? So just kind of start making a list. And also you should think about when you're going to read these papers. So you know when the deadline for the module is. So I would expect actually you found more papers than you probably can read within the limits of this module. So you'll need to prioritize your reading, prioritize which papers or maybe which subject that you're going to read most. So start constructing these sorts of lists, okay, and draft an outline of your review section. So how are you going to organize the literature, and what will the subsection headings be? So what I would expect is that, let's say your topic is evolutionary robotics, and therefore you may have a subsection which is about bodies, evolving controllers, maybe evolving both. So you might have 3 main subsections within the literature review with that, whatever it is that you're putting. So just think about those things, try and come up with some answers to these questions so that we can talk about them in the workshop that's coming up. Okay, thanks for that, and I'll talk to you again soon.